How's everybody doing today? Hope you guys have been enjoying the conference. I know I have. I'm going to be presenting on something a little different. I'm going to step up here and hop on my soapbox and talk about marketing. Why, as sometimes brand managers, marketers, people working within the digital space, sometimes can't let their core message translate online. Right? So my main focus today is I'm going to talk about how consumer distrust is affecting the path to purchase. I'm going to talk about your brand voice, how to utilize micro-moments to increase visibility, in particular within the social space. I'm also going to talk about how to take your organization from transactional to experiential. Now, before I get into that, I want to talk about my latest accomplishment. Now, I've worked with many brands, from Fortune 500 brands to high-profile individuals, but my most satisfying accomplishment is me getting my private pilot's license. Do we have any private pilots in the building? Well, if you understand how exuberating it feels when you're in the air and it's just you and the sky, right? It's something that I always love, and it's always been a dream of mine to actually fly to my clients, right? So just to let you know a little bit more about me and my other accomplishments, I actually started my marketing career off as a DJ. It's a college DJ at UC Berkeley. And I put my toe into the water a little bit when it comes to starting up my own social network. And there was another guy on the East Coast who was starting up a social network during that time, but his social network was only focused on college students. And I was like, that's never going to go anywhere. But now he's worth $63 billion, and let's just say I don't have that much in the bank account. All right. I also founded Digital Branding Institute. Now, this essentially is a brain dump of all things digital branding. Selfishly, I wanted to reach out and get my PhD, but I figured out it wasn't really the play for me. It was more or less of an ego play. I just wanted to have that doctor in front of my name, to be honest. So I created this institute as a brain dump for all content and activities around digital branding. I'm also the Senior Digital Brand Manager, as Jeff mentioned, of the University of Southern California. I'm sure you guys are familiar with that institution. And I'm also the Chief Strategist of Digital Delane, which essentially is an agency that helps to build, manage, and measure digital brands. Now, I'm not saying all of this to gloat, but I want to give you a good understanding of my experience around digital branding, and partially to let you guys know about my offerings. But the truth of the matter is, when it comes to building a digital brand that truly resonates with your target audience, you have to understand your core consumer. As marketers, we all know that. And today, we live in a different time, because now many consumers really don't know the difference between fact and fiction, between fake news and real news. Right? You have seamless product integrations, you have media scandals, and so on and so forth. And this naturally is affecting the way that consumers are engaging with and perceiving your brand. In fact, in this Edelman survey, only 48% of respondents actually trust businesses. So doing the math, 52% don't, right? So we understand that there is some disconnect, right, between trust and authenticity between you and your brand. However, I believe that there are 3 specific events that happened within, let's say, the last 10 to 15 years that have dramatically affected the way that consumers view brands, and especially view large brands. And can anyone think about any one of those events, what they would be? Wells Fargo. Yeah, that's definitely one. And it really alludes to this particular event here. You guys remember that one? Occupy Wall Street movement. Remember during that time, during this Occupy Wall Street movement, things started to change. There was a shift in the way in which brands communicated with consumers. In particular, after the financial and housing meltdown, consumers wanted their voice heard. They were pissed that they lost their house, their savings, so on and so forth, all because of the shady and unethical business practices that large corporations had. In fact, it was almost a negative connotation for you to put corporation behind your brand name. And as you notice, more brands started to shy away from that, right? So now brands had to open up and be more transparent with their communication. You started to see content that was less polished, right? You started to see communications that were more diverse and inclusive. And it really all started up, from what I've noticed, from this particular event. And then you have the second event. You guys know what this is. Me Too movement, Black Lives Matter movement, Time's Up movement. Consumers utilizing social media to make their voice heard. And it was essentially affecting the bottom lines of many large brands. And I think the average consumer really believes that marketing is supposed to illuminate the values of your organization, right? But when that organization is associated with, let's say, an individual that is doing, deplorable acts, there's a disconnect. Now, consumers are starting to boycott and make purchasing decisions based on these affiliations that your organization has with these individuals. I mean, especially if the individual believes harass is 2 words. Then you have this event. You guys remember this? Cambridge Analytica scandal, when my arch nemesis here was testifying against Congress, for Congress. So this here is an event that, as marketers, really goes down as a day of infamy, really, because Facebook has changed their business model, and most of the other social networks have followed suit. And now we're not able to engage the way in which we once were with our target audience. The data that's being collected, right, on our audience is no longer available, right? Facebook and many other social networks are cutting off their APIs, which is affecting a lot of third-party apps that are attaching to those, right? So as we continue to target our audience, they're becoming savvier and understanding that we're utilizing the data to target them with ads. And I love this meme because it speaks volumes, right? Consumers become savvier, and they understand that companies like Google and Facebook are utilizing their data in order to stock them with ads, to manipulate their emotions and opinions, and even political views. So this means that many consumers are starting to distrust even digital advertising simply because of the data that is being collected, and because data collection and privacy is now brought to the forefront. So what does that mean? All of this involved, whether it be the events that happened in the last 10 to 15 years, from the Occupy Wall Street movement, Me Too movement, and the testimony of Mark Zuckerberg, as well as just the overall distrust that consumers have built for large corporations, large brands. It's starting to impact the path to purchase. So I think as marketers, if we're trying to reach out to these individuals, we have to understand some of those things. And hopefully that would help us to change or optimize the way in which we communicate or engage with them. Now, here's something we all should all know as well. It's typical sales and marketing funnel, right? It's starting from the awareness, consideration, decision, and retention phase. Now, many of the business models, I'm sure that some of the organizations that you've worked with utilize this type of model, right? This model is very flat. It's a very flat model. What's interesting is that consumers understand now, as they become savvier, that most businesses have this funnel. So if they were to go to your website, download some type of downloadable incentive, put their information in on your website, they know that they're going to be followed up with, they're going to be put in a sequence, they're going to be contacted via email, through phone call or snail mail, right? So what does that mean as marketers? It means that as consumers become savvier, those types of communications become less effective. So this is the new funnel. It incorporates everything that goes on outside of that, right? Again, contributing to the distrust that consumers have. Your model, your funnel would have to be more flexible to adjust to the modern consumer. And this is something that I'm sure we all probably know, but it looks a little bit different when you actually see it and when you actually absorb it in the context that I presented. Naturally, consumers are doing things outside of the funnel that involve, researching your information through, peer review sites, through social media, looking at your visibility, the level of engagement, so on and so forth, before they begin even doing business with your organization. So what do you do? What do you do when you have a savvier customer who has seemingly distrust for brands, to engage with them and connect with them in a way that would get them to do business with you? I believe nowadays you need to focus on digital branding. And digital branding is the whole puzzle, so to speak, right? Meaning you have these different digital marketing tactics that are a piece of that puzzle, but you have to look at your overarching brand to see how that contributes to the path to purchase. And so we have the three main digital marketing practices or techniques. One is social media marketing, content marketing, and SEO. Those are pretty much the main three. And what I think is that a lot of those tactics are starting to become antiquated or just starting to plateau. I'm going to hop on my soapbox here. But here's what I think. I think when it comes to social media marketing, and we pretty much all know this, that it's no longer an organic platform, right? You have to pay to play. Back in the day when you're able to reach all of your audience, right, those days were good, but they're gone. So now social has essentially become a paid platform. And what's interesting about social media is that you have to engage based on the new algorithm that was set after that testimony that Mark Zuckerberg gave to Congress. Now it's all about engagement, which means that if you were to post a link on social media, you're not going to get that much organic engagement. But if you were to post a conversation or a topic or question around that, the topic of that content, then you're going to get more organic reach. Even if you have paid, people are actually able to respond to your paid ads on this platform. But if you don't engage with people who are engaging with your paid advertisement, you may be suppressing your reach as well, right? So those are some things to think about. Now, with content marketing, I absolutely love content marketing. I think it gives a good indication of the values that your offering can provide your target audience. But I think people are also suffering from content overload. And I think that consumers are becoming savvier and they understand what a good piece of content looks like, right? I mean, if you watch the Super Bowl commercials, they're all commercials that really pull at your heartstring, right? And so now as consumers become savvier, they're starting to understand the formula. And a lot of the marketers are adopting the same exact formula. So people start to become numb to it, right? And I think it hasn't gotten to that point yet, but I think it will, especially with all the content that consumers are consuming now. And so you also have you also have search engine optimization as well. That's the third piece of that puzzle. And with SEO, we all know that we're trying to chase that algorithm, because if Google shifts something in their algorithms or start to include brand signals and things like that, we have to adjust. So one of the reasons why we're even here at this conference is to make sure that we're all set and we're expanding our knowledge base when trying to reach our target audience. But oftentimes it's difficult to try to figure out how to piece all of these things together when it comes to social media marketing, content marketing, and SEO, right? So that's one of the reasons why I feel like as brands, we should consider our digital brand as a way to connect and engage with our target audience. Now, I've defined a digital brand as the identity, visibility, and credibility among consumers who discover, relate to, and interact with the brand on digital platforms. Now, it's important to understand that because as consumers become savvier and they're going outside of this very traditional and flat funnel, you have to consider your overarching digital brand. So, how can you specifically enhance your digital brand? Well, this is the time to start taking notes. So I'm going to be throwing a couple of tips, tricks, and hacks that you can use to expand your digital brand. Now, there's so many things that I can include, but for sure I want to talk about things that I really like or the experiences that I've had working with other organizations and clients and what's worked for them. So hopefully you can take that and apply it when you get to the office. First things first, digital identity. Now, this goes beyond your website and even the content that you're developing, but it has to start with your brand voice. And I often find many clients have a difficulty conveying their brand voice and letting that translate through online platforms. So here's a breakdown of the 4 components of a brand voice. One is character, purpose, language, and tone. So your character is the human characteristics of your brand, right? The purpose is that ownable point of view on how you're going to provide value to your target audience. And language is the words that you use to describe your product, your service, or language that would be used within that community of people interacting and engaging with your brand. And the tone is, it's not what you say, but how you say it. It's the order, the rhythm, the pace, the cadence of the types of text content and so on that you distribute online. Now, as a case study for the University of Southern California, here's our brand voice. For our character, we want to be engaging. We want to let people know that, hey, there's actually a human behind the social media handle, and it's not just a bot that's responding to their messages. The purpose is to make sure that we have an open campus, meaning we want to focus on displaying what it's like to live and learn on the campus, being very open, authentic, and transparent is our goal. And then the language. We use the same language that we would use that we would have on campus so that people would be used to that type of language once they step foot on campus. And the tone is very authentic and conversational, right? It's very different from the copy that we would have on a print collateral or even on our website. We want to make sure that those platforms are different. Here's an example of a brand voice fail. Now, I was in San Francisco Bay Area at a theme park here, and I came across this advertisement. I said, I got to take a picture of this and put this in my presentation. So I hope we don't have any Allegro representatives here, but because I'm about to talk about you right now. But here's a bad example of a brand voice alignment, right? It says, tell your allergies bye, Felicia. And this is wrong on so many different levels. But I just don't think it's aligned with their brand. And so it's important to know that this can be an extreme turnoff for your audience, right? I mean, we all want to adopt a brand voice that resonates with our target audience, and we may want to push the envelope a little bit. But this stat shows people really don't like that, right? As you probably know. So it's important to consider that when shaping your brand voice. So if you want to do a brand voice audit, I like acronyms. I used to be DJ back in the day, so this kind of means something for me. OPP. And when I say OPP, you guys are probably thinking of this, right? This group. So I'm not talking about naughty by nature, but I'm talking about your objective, your promise, and your personality. So if you want to provide an audit for your brand voice, use this acronym. So objective, meaning when you do a content audit, when you focus on the objective, is the objective being served? Are you transparent? Is your brand voice and content unique, right? Your promise. Whatever you're promising from your offering or anything else, is that being served? The promise that you have to your audience that you mean business when trying to help them alleviate some of their challenges or whatever is keeping them up at night. Is that content doing that, right? Is your brand voice conveying that? And then also your personality. So I consider your personality like the window to the soul of your brand. And that essentially means that people can look inside of your brand and see what's going on based on the type of personality that you have, who works with your organization, the type of content that you're producing, the sound, the tone, and so on. So these are the 3 things that I think you should check for when doing an audit of your brand voice. The next tip is to be memorable. Duh, we all know this, right? But it works even more so now than ever before. I'll give you an example. You know who these 2 individuals are? Well, you should at least know one, right? Donald Trump and Cardi B. Okay, this is probably the first time you ever heard Cardi B's name at a conference. But what do these 2 individuals have in common? Some may say that, they perhaps say some controversial things. Some may say that they suffer from slurred speech at times. But it's important to know that these two are from reality shows. Well, what does this have to do with what I'm saying? Let me tell you. It's interesting because if you watch reality shows, and I actually ask you this question, by a show of hands, who actually watches reality shows? Some people may not raise their hand, but I think as marketers, you kind of consider that market research, right? But what's interesting is for those who watch reality shows, you always have that one individual that's a standout person, right? They have the attitude and the flair and all that other stuff, right? And they try to do these things in order to get a spin-off show. But you remember them, right? And they end up doing other things. So that's how your brand could be. Meaning, if your brand was a reality show star, what person would it be, right? And so when you think about being memorable and sort of pushing the envelope a little bit as a brand, you can kind of look and see what these individuals from these reality shows have done, right? And when you consider a good case study, Wendys is a great one. I love the Wendys Roast. Are you guys familiar with this? So Wendys did a great job at executing this. I mean, they essentially roasted everyone from people who engage with their site and social media to people who, to their competitors and so on. There's a gift here, actually. That was pretty cool. And so ultimately, when you think about the Wendys Roast and why it was so successful, because I think it was aligned with the newest trend in social media. And that means that they went from servitude to attitude. Servitude to attitude. And what's interesting about this is that Hamburger Helper actually chimed in as well. And they had some success. So in this particular post, the person says, knowing how to mix Hamburger Helper doesn't make you wife material. Ooh. Hamburger Helper jumps in and says, and this makes you husband material? Another person says, drag him, you sexy ass glove. Another person says, OMG, all these food accounts becoming some clackback champs, and I love it. So what's interesting here is that by having this personality, by reshaping, or redefining your brand voice, you're able to reach new audiences, people that may not have gone to your brick and mortar location or have patronized any of your services. But this is something that is, I believe, the latest trend within social media. Because the bottom line here is on social platforms, customers don't want to be helped. They want to be engaged. On social media platforms, customers don't want to be helped. They want to be engaged. You're probably like, Juntae, why do you say this? Well, think about it this way. I'm sure you guys have gone to many conferences. And on the conference agenda, let's say a few years ago, for the social media specific sessions, what were they about? Customer service, right? You really don't see that anymore. Well, why is that? Well, because there's a shift in the market. Customers want to be engaged. So now they're interacting with your brand, not just to handle their customer service requests, but they want to interact with your brand because they want to have an experience with your brand. That's very, very important to note. So my tip here would be to reassess your brand voice. Use the OPP acronym that I mentioned earlier and figure out if you have the type of content, if your brand is engaging, and is it resonating with your target audience. So reassess that brand voice. Next tip would be visibility. How to increase your visibility. Using Microtrends is one way. So I'll provide an example for that, a case study. We all know who this is, right? Beyonce. Yes, we know Beyonce, yeah. And so every time she creates a piece of content, drops an album or anything like that, the internet goes crazy. Last year, she had a performance at Coachella. This was supposed to be another gift. Last year, she had a performance at Coachella, and the internet went crazy. So she had a whole step routine, and she had a costume with Greek letters, right? And anytime she wears a new clothing item, people just kind of go crazy over it. But an example of leveraging this particular micro trend would be, we had a client that was a national silk screening and embroidery company, And what we did is we recreated the costume based on the functions of the website. We created a paid social campaign and leveraged all of the momentum that Beyonce had during that Coachella performance. So these are examples of how you're able to leverage microtrends in order to get more visibility in the space. And then for this particular client, we had a 400 increase in sales for that particular week, simply just off of that particular initiative. So here's my recommendation, is to assess your organization's agility, meaning, can you guys even do something like this, right? Is your team set up for this? Do you have the right people in place? From a bandwidth perspective, from a human resource perspective, and so on, to start leveraging some of these social trends. Because as I mentioned earlier, with the social media algorithms changing, you have to be engaging. And one of the ways to beat that algorithm is to start piggybacking and leveraging social trends. So you have to create a strategy around that and make sure that your team is aligned to leverage that strategy. Another would be to develop a protocol for leveraging these micro trends. Now, we all know that there are major events that are going to end up on social media in particular. You know, you have the NBA Finals, you have the Grammys, whatever industry events, and so on. And so we have to consider how we can create protocols in order to leverage that. So if you know that this event is coming up, make sure that your team is ready to respond via social media so that you can have an extended visibility and extended reach on social platforms. Another is to use micro-moments. Now, what do I mean by micro-moments? Well, a micro-moment is essentially the time in which your target audience wants to throw money at you. And this has to do with context, intent, and immediacy. And it means that you essentially have to be there, be useful, and be quick. So when you're developing an ad campaign, when you're pushing out a piece of content or so on, use micro moments in order to get your content to your target audience in a time in which they're ready to receive it. So being there, well, what does that mean? Well, I think there's questions that you have to ask yourself, meaning, what time of day is your audience consuming your content? Where are they? Are they on the street, in their car, at your brick and mortar location, and so on? A good example is Red Roof Inn. They provide business travelers housing, right? And so if you were to focus on, let's say, whatever's latest in the news, the 747 MAX 8 plane that was grounded, which left a lot of business travelers grounded. So making sure that you create a strategy to have a paid campaign that's directed to that particular target audience in their unique situation is a form of being there, right? And then being useful, providing content that's actually useful. Home Depot does a great job at this. They have content that is there for their target audience that doesn't speak specifically about their offerings or any of their products and services. It's just useful. If you're trying to lay down tile, if you're trying to fix a faucet, you have videos there. So as marketers, we should do a content audit to figure out how much content we have that's actually useful for our target audience without mentioning our offering. And it's important because many consumers would like to patronize brands that provide useful information above all else. It's very, very important for us to think about that. Next is being quick, making sure that you have this information, make sure that you have the information quickly disseminated to your target audience. And I'll kind of go through this really quickly as well. It's very important to talk about the experience. In this particular survey, customer experience, this is a 2019 survey from eConsultancy, says that customer experience over content marketing, mobile personalization, and social. So it's all about the experience that we have with our target audience that's going to help us to win at the end of the day. So ultimately, your keys to success are to focus on understanding today's consumers, realizing that they have distrust for many organizations based on the past events, how they're becoming savvier, as well as reassessing your brand voice to make sure that you have a brand voice that resonates with them, with today's consumers. And then using micro-moments and micro-trends to increase your visibility. Whatever campaign that you're doing, make sure that you're utilizing these trends so that you can extend the reach of your campaign. And of course, create experiences. That's so important because when it comes to branding and when it comes to engaging with your target audience, people aren't necessarily going to focus on price and product anymore. They're going to focus on the experience that they have with your brand. So as you create these campaigns, start to think about the experiences that your consumer is going to have with your brand, and let's revert from only thinking about transactions. And if you do that, then I think you are going to win. That's my time. Thank you so much.
Juntae, awesome. Appreciate you.